Hello and welcome to today's webinar, CMMC Assessments and C3PAOs, Preparing for Evolving Governance, presented by NeoSystems, Forvis Mazars, CyberNINE, and Wise Technical Innovations. I'm Don Carnevale, Director of Marketing at NeoSystems, and I'll be the host for today's event. This is the third webinar in our five-part series entitled From Surviving to Thriving, the CMMC Enforcement Era Playbook. Please keep an eye out for invitations to future episodes coming soon. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can enter them into the Q&A area within Zoom. We will have some time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. Also, we will make the webinar recording and presentation slides available to all registrants in the coming days. Now I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's discussion, Megan Kennett from NeoSystems. Megan?
Thank you, Don, and thanks everybody for being here. I'm Megan Kennett, CMMC Product Marketing Manager here at NeoSystems and the moderator of today's discussion. Our goal with this series is simple: to help government contractors move beyond compliance anxiety and uncertainty and towards confidence and maturity, showing up sharper, prepared, and ready to move from surviving to thriving. For those of you new to tuning in, NeoSystems is a managed services provider who has spent over 23 years supporting government contractors with their accounting, IT, cybersecurity, and compliance. And today I'm proud to be joined by three professionals whom I deeply respect, who not only lead successful businesses of their own, but actively serve the CMMC community and ecosystem, working every day to shape it for the better. Each have been on the front lines of multiple CMMC assessments, and we're just fortunate to have them with us today sharing their perspectives. Before we jump into the discussion, I'd love to give each of our panelists a moment to introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about your role in the ecosystem and the perspective you bring to today's conversation. And ladies first, of course.
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Corinne Wise. I'm a lead assessor and CEO at Wise Technical Innovations here in Norfolk, Virginia. I'm really proud to be from this area where we have a lot of DIB contractors. We're also an authorized training provider in the CMMC ecosystem, and we've been really privileged to have interacted with so many of the assessors that we now have in the ecosystem. And so that's our major roles in the CMMC ecosystem right now.
Thank you, Corinne. Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I'm Tom Tollerton. I'm a principal in Forvis Mazars, top 10 public accounting and professional services firm, and also an authorized C3PAO. I'm a lead CCA and serve as the vice chair of the CyberAB's C3PAO Advisory Council.
Thank you so much, Tom, for being here. And last but not least, Scott Singer.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, happy to be here. I'm looking forward to this. I am the CEO of CyberNINES. We are also a C3PAO, and I have the good fortune of working with Tom and Corinne on the C3PAO Advisory Council that I chair. This is kind of a mission-driven thing for me. I was in the Navy 30 years and retired, and luckily I was able to kind of turn my career towards protecting the DIB on the cyber side. So back to you, Megan.
Thank you all. And we are very fortunate to have this level of experience with us today. Now that you've met our speakers, let's zoom out for a moment, take a look at the agenda and where we'll focus our conversation. Right. We've corralled some of the sharpest minds and assessors in the ecosystem to shed some light on the CMMC assessments and the evolving governance surrounding the C3PAO community. Together, we'll set the stage with a quick snapshot of where we are today, what operational readiness looks like, how governance is evolving and why, and where contractors may encounter speed bumps along the way. And of course, we'll let the assessors do most of the talking, and we'll open the lines up for Q&A. So when we trace CMMC back to its origins, we actually have to go back quite a bit. In 2010, the Executive Order 13556 formally established the concept of controlled unclassified information, or CUI, That decision really laid the groundwork for the cybersecurity expectations we see across the defense industrial base. And I'm not sure anyone expected this track star to run a 15-year marathon, but here we are. With the CMMC rule now codified, Title 48 having cleared OIRA, the program has been enforceable since November the 10th, officially setting the DoD's phased implementation into motion. We are still in phase one, the self-attestation phase, with phase two expected to kick off in the fall on November the 10th. The DoD's four-phase rollout. It's important to note that third-party assessments didn't start yesterday. So while the policy foundation of CMMC has been building for more than a decade, the assessment ecosystem itself is evolving in real time. And that evolution, particularly around C3PAO governance, consistency, and oversight, is exactly what we're going to unpack today. So for contractors preparing for certification, the question isn't what does the rule say? It's also how the assessment process is being interpreted and applied across the ecosystem. And that's where the experience of today's panel becomes incredibly valuable. So beginning with you, Corinne, you've been conducting assessments for quite some time now. How would you compare the early days of CMMC assessments to what you're seeing now as we enter the enforcement era?
Well, I think you said it good when you said we are entering the enforcement era. So, everything is very young and new, and it all started for C3PAOs during the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program. And during that time, we were accompanied by the DIBCAC until the new rule became final. And so obviously, we benefited from being able to see how the DoD had previously been conducting these. And those of us that were a part of that really saw I would say, kind of the strict nature by which they conducted the assessments. And so, when C3PAOs were set free to do the assessments without the DIBCAC after the new rule became final, Title 32, Part 170, we've been in this year or so of the initial assessments all alone out in the ecosystem of C3PAOs just doing the best that they can. And so I think we are about to enter a phase of enforcement where the C3PAOs now have to go through accreditation and meet ISO 1720. And what we've seen up until now during that year is, the need for guidance, the need for consistency and more places to look for what right actually looks like in many cases. And so we have some different ways that things are being done, but I think what's about to happen with everyone having to go through authorization then accreditation will bring some consistency to the scene. So I'd say we've seen a lot of inconsistency in that first year.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we're also seeing increased demand. So as Corinne mentioned,
Yes.
we're kind of in this first year of self-attestation, self-assessment, but we're now starting to approach the November 10th deadline. So the demand, the strain on the ecosystem is definitely increasing. And the other thing that has changed since the early days of the JSVA, when we were starting to do early assessments, we'd assumed that one assessor could support the assessment of an OSC, but it's turned out that in the 32 CFR rule, it actually requires two plus a third for quality assurance review, which has kind of changed the leverage model of all of the C3PAOs who thought that one assessor could lead the assessment, but in reality, we have to have two on there. So that's further sort of pinched our ability to get as many assessments completed as possible.
Yep, and I'm sure that also impacts scaling how a C3PAO can scale their organization.
Yep.
All right, well, that actually leads nicely into the topic of scaling the ecosystem. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so as CMMC did move from concept to implementation, the challenge was more than just policy writing and how to enforce the rule. It was scaling a functioning ecosystem while ensuring those clear ground rules, fairness, and most importantly, consistency. So this shift from startup or wild, wild west mode to a more regulated model has introduced new expectations for operational maturity and increased scrutiny for the C3PAO community. Scott, This is probably an appropriate time to bring up the C3PAO Advisory Council that you serve on and chair. What exactly is the C3PAO Advisory Council and why was it formed?
Sure. The advisory council was formed to provide guidance to the Cyber AB because if you think about the Cyber AB, it's a certifying body and it's not necessarily staffed with a lot of experts on how to assess and how to, do consulting and support companies getting ready. So they rely on practitioners like us to feed them back information on how the program should work and the ecosystem should work. So that's kind of our biggest role here is we're not we're not setting, or any requirements. We're just purely providing guidance. And the guidance, by the way, that we provide does get reviewed by both the Department of War, Defense, and the Cyber AB before any of that knowledge gets released out to, the assessors, lead assessors, and companies like C3PAOs.
Great, thank you. Corinne, as a lead assessor and C3PAO, can you explain the level of collaboration that's going on in the background to improve consistency?
Well, I think what Scott is touching on is a big part of that. So the advisory council consists of, if we just talk about one of the major committees there, it's the CAP committee. And I mean, the level of work that they're doing right now, from the level of comments that they got about the current cap is tremendous. They are going through each and every one of these comments, which are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments. I know I submitted like 63 of them, so I was added to that pain, but they're working diligently to address concerns that have been brought up over this first year and to get it right and to really make sure that it provides, a very detailed, quality assured process so that we're all on the same page. We're all kind of dancing to the same sheet of music. And so that's a huge one. And then we've got the ESP committee that is also working really hard on tough technical topics and questions that continue to haunt the ecosystem every day. We always hear this on LinkedIn and everywhere else about how to view certain scenarios with MSPs and ESPs. They're very complex. And so they're working to provide that guidance. And I think that is going to help a lot, all of the different committees. And I'm on the accreditation committee, which will have a much larger role once accreditations are underway. And it'll be the same thing, just providing that guidance that folks are looking for. And there's going to be a knowledge base too.
Well, thank you both for your service to the community, first and foremost. I will say, for those of you listening and you're hearing CAP, it does stand for CMMC assessment process. I know
Thank you.
a lot of great acronyms out here. And ESP, unless you've been living under a rock, you should know that ESP stands for external service provider, but have to put that out there.
Thanks.
No worries. All right. So that question of consistency brings us into one of the bigger concerns biggest concerns of that contractors raise. If we could please go to the next slide. So a lot of contractors here is talking about assessment and assessor variability, and we've actually hosted a few webinars on the topic of the human factor as a gray area, which continues to create some inconsistencies and sometimes negative outcomes. Scott, are governance mechanisms emerging that you believe will help reduce that assessor variability?
So, yeah, Megan, it's a great point. I mean, humans are humans, right? And no matter what we do, we're going to have some different interpretations of the, the controls that came from NIST 800-171. And there's also the issues of that framework is getting older and technologies are just kind of overtaking some of the ideas that were originally, based in that framework. But if we go back a little bit to there's two control mechanisms that I see that are going to start to create some consistency in the ecosystem. And one is what Corinne was talking about, the CMMC assessment process. That's the process that all the C3PAOs have to follow when they're doing an assessment. Okay. And as the accreditation process starts, where the Cyber AB and ANAB are going to come out and assess C3PAOs in meeting the ISO standard 17020, that's going to create some more consistency, because if you don't, follow the cap, you're going to be dropped from being a C3PAO, or they're going to require you to get better. They'll give you a get well list of things you're going to have to do. That's going to help create consistency, right? And then the second part of it is a little bit more, I don't want to, esoteric, maybe not the right word, but a little bit removed, is, as Corinne was also talking about, there's going to be a body of knowledge. Right now, the DOW has a frequently asked questions document. I think it's about 4 pages, if I remember, but it doesn't cover everything. This body of knowledge is going to grow, and it's going to give advice on things like what's a significant change, how do you interpret this specific control. It's going to give more guidance on that. And so then where does the actual forcing mechanism come from? I believe it's going to come from, as there are any complaints that get filed against assessors that get boil up to the Cyber AB for adjudication. The Cyber AB is going to use that body of knowledge as their guidance on deciding on how to resolve, adjudicate that issue. That will naturally create, human nature is, I don't want to get in trouble. And if I know where to go to kind of get some guidance on something, I'm going to go follow it. So I think that's going to be how this is going to, a couple of ways, this is going to start to become a little bit more of a mature, consistent ecosystem.
Thank you, Scott. Tom, how do we strike the balance between consistency and professional judgment without turning assessments into a check the box kind of exercise?
Yeah, I mean, we have to take a look at things. So hopefully, we don't get too much just check the box, send me a screenshot or document. We actually have to conduct some sort of inspection. But I would say, sort of in addition to what Scott and Corinne have talked about with the common body of knowledge, the accreditation process of C3PAOs that are going to make sure that assessors are following the appropriate guidance. I would also say that the CAICO, which is responsible for training of assessors, is now with ISACA. And so right now, ISACA has a number of working groups evolving the training program, or the exam program, I should say, associated for that assessors have to complete. And so we'll start to see, there have been in the past some complaints about the tests and how, accurate it is relative to actually conducting an assessment. I think we'll start to see that evolve a little bit and make it more challenging, but we'll start to see more stringency, I think, around actually credentialing individual assessors. But I mean, I think we'll always have that assessor's judgment element. It's in every framework, everywhere. It comes down to experience. It comes down to perspective, as well as sort of having an assessor's personality as well. So we're going to talk a little bit later, I think, about what to look for in C3PAOs and assessors. There's some things that you probably want to take a look at.
Great. Thank you, Tom. And Corinne, from your point of view, where does assessor variability most commonly show up in assessments?
I think it shows up, and a lot of it does go back to training. So one of the great things about what's about to happen with ISACA is that I think there's just going to be one curriculum, and they're working really hard on that one curriculum, trying to get it right. Their process is pretty amazing. They've obviously done this over and over again, but they're pulling together, subject matter experts to try to create the ultimate great curriculum. And I'm sure they'll have to revise that a few times, but the variability is huge when there were, I don't know how many different curriculums there were, but there were lots. And some were great and some were not. And so that shows in assessors big time. I mean, there's no doubt about it that, somebody could be trained at company A or B, and their understanding of the entire process and the requirements could vary greatly. So I think that's probably one of the biggest factors when it comes to assessor variability. And then what Tom mentioned, that what will also be brought to the table is consistent requirements that they have learned over the past year are needed in order for someone to be successful on assessment. I think the Cyber AD did an amazing job, by the way. They have gotten this to where it's at now, and I just think that was very wise of them to push it to this next level.
Thank you. And one place that tension becomes very real is in level 2 boundary determinations. If we can progress to the next slide, please. All right, so this is it seems this is one of the most common areas of confusion for contractors, defining your level 2 scope. It's also one of the areas where interpretations can have major downstream consequences. So beginning with you, Tom, what NIST controls or architectural decisions most often end up being debated?
Yeah, I mean, there are a ton of them. I would say maybe at its most basic level, taking a look at the enterprise versus the enclave approach is always the starting point. And there's in a lot of small businesses, medium-sized businesses, there are questions around which approach makes sense. What level of CUI are we handling? How much government defense contract work do we have? Is it worth investing in an enclave? Are we small enough to just make it enterprise wide? There's just a lot of questions that go in from a business perspective that go into, that approach. And then there's the question of the use of remote access versus a VDI infrastructure, if there is a cloud element to it as well. And then I would say, at a high level, the use of those external service providers and cloud service providers are often up for debate if they are not ready to be part of an assessment. So if an OSC has an MSP, a managed service provider, but they haven't really thought through their role and haven't put together a shared responsibility matrix, that sometimes is kind of a non-starter for an assessment firm to come in and do an assessment because MSPs are critical to this. And so we see a lot of small businesses that leverage and rely upon MSPs, but the MSPs aren't completely ready. So, that could be a whole bunch of different kind of controls, technical controls in NIST 800-171. But I would just say from a high level, that is certainly a priority for any OSC if they're getting ready to go through this assessment.
Thank you, Tom. That's wonderful. Great perspectives and advice. Moving on to you, Corinne, where are you seeing the most confusion when contractors define their level 2 assessment boundary?
I think it has a lot to do with their flows. So it starts at the very beginning. We have something called CUI flows, and it's just the idea that you truly know, and this is shocking to people, that they know every source and every destination. If they don't know every source and every destination, it can be really difficult to go any further, or it rears its ugly head during assessment, which would be a disaster. So you really have to get a handle, and there's a requirement that says, you must know every source and every destination. And it's a relief once you have tracked all that, because the boundaries that you have right now become kind of evident where you're putting it. Maybe you find out you're putting it places you shouldn't. And maybe you have to redesign a little bit, and you start to figure out what the architecture needs are, and you kind of begin to figure out where the projects need to be done to fit those flows and to get that perfect combination of data protection and the productivity that you need. And that's really the name of the game in CMMC.
And that
And it drives boundaries. Yeah, it drives the boundaries are going to be around that and secure that situation, following the rules of the physical protection domain and the things like the systems and communication domain or the media protection domain, which require the protections around that data.
Wonderful, which is where it all begins.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then Scott, as government contractors prepare for their level 2 assessment, what can they do to reduce interpretive drift and avoid surprises?
So I think the best course of action personally, if I was putting my shoes, where they're at, if I was the company, one of the biggest things is to do a mock assessment. And ideally, is my you know idea or my suggestion is having that mock assessor be the same person that ends up actually doing the assessment. Okay. It creates a continuity and it creates the no surprises, right? Because the and again, that mock assessment has to be done in a fashion where they don't provide any consulting, okay? But they can provide a mock assessment. It's technically they're just doing a NIST 800-171 um, assessment, and it's not part of the CMMC assessment process. It's pre-CAP, to use an acronym we've already talked about. And going through all 110 controls, all 320 assessment objectives, and knowing what it is that you're doing right or not, because the mock assessment will allow the assessor to say why it wasn't met. For example, we were talking about the boundaries, right? Well, in 3.1.20, there is one of the assessment requirements is the use of external systems is verified. Okay. So what are these systems being used for, right? And you just have to really answer each question. But I can come back and say, well, you didn't tell me what these systems were being used for, right? And so that can be my response. And then it's pretty easy to figure out what you need to do to fix it, right? I don't have to give you consulting to tell you how to do that. I think that is the biggest thing. And then give yourself some time between the mock assessment and the actual level 2 assessment. Give yourself a couple of months, 60 days, 30, some time to be able to fix all those things. And that's going to be the biggest key to success.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Scott. All right. Well, now that some of the scope is better defined and we're preparing for our assessment better, the next question is whether the assessment community itself is ready for the demands of enforcement. So we spent a lot of time talking about whether contractors are ready, but contractors also want to know whether the C3PAO community is ready, operationally, consistently, and able to scale and support, and more importantly, supporting those hundreds of thousands of government contractors working with CY that need to get certified. Tom, I believe your firm hosted a panel on C3PAO readiness in July on the topic of C3PAO governance. So I'll kick this first question off to you. Is DoD policy driving C3PAO readiness, or is it the primes in the market?
Driving C3PAO readiness. I mean, I think that the Cyber AB is working as quickly as they can to get C3PAOs authorized or accredited. I think the real challenge, the real bottleneck is at the individual assessor level, which is there's a pretty stringent background check that takes a while it's not overly stringent, but it takes a while to get through. In addition to the training and years of experience that are required to be a CCA, a CMMC certified assessor. So just from a readiness standpoint, that's kind of the key. As far as operational readiness, I mean that a lot of that goes into um, things like project management and understanding scheduling and having been through an assessment process, built an assessment process that's fairly mature so that you understand, all right, what's our capacity to actually be able to serve clients? How many CCAs do we have at our disposal? Are they full-time employees? Are they W-2s, 1099s? Are they going to be available when our clients want us to be available? And then making sure the project schedule works for the client as well, because these assessments are typically happening pretty quickly. In Scott, Corinne, and my business and other C3PAOs, we try and get through them fairly efficiently. And so we want to make sure the schedule is accurate. We want to make sure that the OSC is correctly prepared. So we do a lot of scoping due diligence up front. That's a big key in early discussions with the C3PAO that you choose to work with, being open, honest, accurate with your responses around scoping, what the environment looks like, and your true readiness to go through the assessment at the desired time. Because if you delay, you may end up not just sort of inconveniencing the C3PAO, but you may not be able to get through your assessment if it has to get kicked down the road because the C3PAO may have other assessments scheduled in the coming months. So that's what I would say as far as OSC readiness, and then also the C3PAO governance.
A lot of moving parts and pieces, it sounds like.
Yep.
All right. Moving over to you, Corinne. What operational maturity do you see C3PAOs needing today that may not have been as important in the early days of the CMMC program?
Well, I wish I could be a fly on the wall during the reauthorization calls. And I'm imagining that they're seeing things that need to be corrected, right? So we know that this is a young program, and part of enforcement is consequences. So I think, until we see certain examples of what happens when you do things incorrectly, we might not see as much progress as we need to. So I think that's going to be an important part. I just wanted to bring it back to enforcement. That's going to be an important part of operational readiness, because you can crank out a bunch of assessments, but if you're not doing them correctly or properly, it can be a massive risk to both the OSC and the C3PAO. So we've got that happening right now. We've got a lot of that oversight kicking in right now. We've got a lot of things the C3PAOs are facing. The question is whether or not they're ready for that level of scrutiny. And it's a lot. Like, it is very hard to explain to people, number one, what it's like to run an assessment, and the amount of work and effort that goes into that is grueling. Like, it is a lot of work. Anybody who's doing those will tell you it is a tremendous amount of work, or it should be. If it's not, they're probably not doing the assessment correctly. So you have a lot of writing to do and a lot of documenting and record keeping. So C3PAOs have one of two approaches that I've seen, and that is that they're waiting to get the operational capabilities down pat perfectly and to make it through their reauthorization or their first authorization and then their accreditation perfectly before they scale up, right? So they've got the engine is ready to go. They're ready to move forward in a consistent manner with everything, or and then they're going to hire and then begin to bring people into that process that has been, really refined. Or they're just crashing their company with resources, and they're off and running with a ton of teams, and they're going to have to tackle that operational side of things the same way, but it'll be a little bit more difficult because they've got a much larger team and a lot more folks to encompass in that authorization, reauthorization, or accreditation process. So just an example, they're looking at your training records as a C3PAO. Rather than pulling out a few teams of training records, you've got to kind of look at this whole massive thing that you've got going on now if you're a larger C3PAO. And so when you ask about operational readiness, it's the approach that they're taking as a C3PAO. And as this rigor is applied, are they ready for it? That is the question. And we don't know the answer to that question until we get a little further down the road and everybody's kind of gone through it and we begin to see the outcome of that.
Thank you, Corinne.
Yeah.
That naturally leads us into a broader question of governance itself. Move on to the next slide, please. So stronger governance creates fairness, predictability, and trust, right? But if it goes too far, it can also stifle expertise, slow things down, and create unnecessary rigidity. So, Scott, how do you see stronger governance with CMMC benefiting the ecosystem? And then what are the risks if we don't adopt an increased governance?
So yeah, Megan, I definitely agree with the premise that, that this is a balancing act, and we do want predictability, consistency, and we don't want so much variability because that can hurt the ecosystem and create lack of trust in the process, right? And so we need to be able to create that consistency. And I kind of talked already about some of the levers that Cyber AB has with the accreditation process to get, things more consistent. Talked a bit about the advisory council and how this body of knowledge is going to get created. So, but as we're providing that guidance, if we get too prescriptive, right, that's going to slow things down, right? And one of the things is, for example, every assessment has interview, it has review and test, right? And so when you get into the test process, if we require too much data to test, then and we get too technical with things like confidence levels and things like that on how much we're going to assess, right? Then these assessments are going to take longer and longer, and they're going to cost more money, right? And so the enemy of good is perfect here, right? We've got 118,000 companies that need to get assessed in a certain amount of time, and there aren't a lot of assessors that are going to be there out there that are going to help, do this, right? So if we get too strict on this process, there's no way we're going to get through all these companies, and we're going to be at risk as a country because of cybersecurity risk. So it's a tough problem, and I don't have a specific answer to it other than we can't get too prescriptive, but we also can't be too loose, and because that's the other side of the coin, right? Where we're not really protecting a company if somebody gets through an assessment super quick and they didn't really look at what they needed to look at, the assessors. That's the other side of the equation.
Like, thank you.
Back to you.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done. That's enough on that subject.
No, I was going to say we're fortunate. I mean, the ecosystem is very fortunate to have you as the chair. So that's one thing, one little observation I was going to make. All right. So let's bring this all back to, I apologize. I had a question as well for Tom on this topic. So governance reform, as we were mentioning, has a tendency to eliminate some of that it may have a tendency to eliminate that interpretation variability by issuing narrow assessment guidance requiring escalation for judgment calls, for example. But the result can be assessors stop using expertise and instead follow these rules, right? These interpretive guidance rules. So a little bit more on what kind of what Scott was saying, but I was just going to ask Tom, how do you think we can avoid that over standardization process in the way that in a way that limits the professional judgment experience and that assessors bring to the table?
Yeah, I think that it's a little similar to an earlier question you had. I mean, obviously, we certainly do want consistency. I mean, we want one assessor to interpret something the same way as another assessor. Um, I mean, I think some of this question comes down to the idea of, well, there will be new emerging technologies and new ideas and solutions on how to implement a control and that we haven't seen before. So there'll be those situations where professional judgment does come up and experience does come up. And I think really it comes down to, uh, we're in some ways kind of all on the same team here. I mean, the assessors ought to want the success of the OSC to get through an assessment. Now we have to be objective, we have to be independent, and we have to follow the cap. So there's that rule, but we're not out to it's not a gotcha exercise. We're not out to prove how smart we are. It really needs to be solutions oriented from an assessment standpoint. I mean, try and figure out how can this work? How does this work? I mean, sometimes it can't, but you want to have that sort of mentality of success for all parties involved. So that's not going to be everybody. It's not going to be a natural personality trait in everybody. But my perspective is, and that's kind of the way that I would suggest OSCs kind of look to C3PAOs is to have someone who's going to be open and transparent with you as far as what they see early, um, because I think we all need to kind of want everybody's success.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. So let's bring this all back to the people we're speaking to in the audience, contractors trying to prepare to succeed and win federal contracts. All right. So we've talked about where CMMC is today, the benefits of increased governance and the risks of going without. We've spoken about assessor variability, and the evolving ecosystem. But at the end of the day, our contractors want clarity and practical guidance. They want to know what matters, what's noise, what to avoid, and how to position themselves for success. So let's close with a quick lightning round of questions for each panelist. Tom, if you could give contractors one piece of advice today, one thing they should do now to reduce risk and improve their chances of certification success, what would it be?
Lightning round. Well, certainly, I mean, if you haven't started, now is the time to get that gap assessment done and to figure out what needs to be done. I think that's kind of the easy out answer. But I would say too, a mock assessment can be valuable. So if as Scott was talking about earlier, it's sort of a simulated assessment by a C3PAO. And so if you have questions, concerns that, you might have some rocks that might be large enough that you might not be successful in an assessment, try the mock assessment. Typically, they're more efficient and quicker than an actual assessment. And certainly, if you're going to fail an assessment, you want to know about it. So consider the mock assessment as part of, working with a C3PAO.
Excellent. Thank you. And Scott, we talk about the importance of vetting your external service provider ad nauseum. It's a very, very popular topic and an important topic. But contractors also they also have to choose the right assessor, the right C3PAO. What's one piece of advice you'd give to an organization evaluating and shopping for a C3PAO?
So I think understanding whether they have done it before, right? Have they done them? And have they assessed your type of environment? Do they have people that understand, if you're, whether you're Microsoft or Amazon or Google or Prevail or Kiteworks or QuickTrack? I don't want to leave anybody out there. I left a bunch out, sorry. But anyway, whatever your environment is, that they understand it. That's important. Have they had any complaints? Okay, with the cyber AP, they may not be able to answer there. They may not want to answer that question, but have there been any complaints? Do they have do they have W-2 assessors? I think having a certain, it doesn't mean you can't do 1099s because there's just valid reasons to do that. But what's their process? Like, I mean, in our environment, our lead CCA is an employee and the assessor is 1099. That's just how we're trying to scale and do it in a quality way. So what's their focus on those types of things? Quality, process. So anyway, some thoughts.
That's great. Thank you. Corinne, what's one practical step contractors can take before an assessment that will make the entire process smoother for both the organization and the assessor?
I would say that either going to the Cyber AB marketplace and making sure that they're either getting helped by someone that understands the program and has been trained on it, like an RP, CCP, or CCA. And obviously the quality goes up with the more training you have. And we kind of just listed them in order as far as the amount of training that each of those get. And that's a registered practitioner, a CMMC certified professional, or a CMMC certified assessor. The reason that's important is because they've been trained on something called scoping, which is about your boundaries, and they've been trained on what the assessor will be looking for during the assessment, and that can be very difficult to decode if you haven't been trained on it. If you're not going to go to the AB marketplace and find one of those people, get trained yourself. That you're actually allowed to take every class that an assessor can take, and you can actually learn how they're trained and see exactly what they're going to be looking for. And since you're required to self-assess as a contractor, why wouldn't you? Since you have to run the same assessment or get someone to run it for you every year or confirm the assessment results, how would you do that without the proper training about NIST SP 800-171 and the assessment rules? So that's probably one of the biggest mistakes we see is they're coming and they didn't know that that knowledge was needed, and it looks like Latin to them when they're looking at all of the information.
Ooh, I might get in trouble for this, but now might be a good time to mention the MSP Collective organization. There is in trouble for this because there are MSPs out there that are level 2 certified. And it is a wonderful resource. It's a free resource for contractors looking for qualified support. So, all right. Thank you, Corinne. Thank you, Tom. All right. So when it comes to CMMC and how NeoSystems is supporting the DIB, our focus is simple. We want to give contractors an accelerated, affordable, low-risk path to compliance without forcing them to become IT or compliance experts in the process. So this is where our CMMC managed services come in. Base is a fully managed CY-ready Microsoft 365 environment designed to help government contractors securely handle sensitive data while accelerating their CMMC Level 2 compliance path. It includes governance orchestration through Neo Maestro, secure Microsoft management, proactive compliance workflows, and a defense-grade SOC with 24/7 monitoring. NeoSystems provides enclave and enterprise-wide solutions as well to support your CMMC journey. Frame is our secure Azure-based hosting environment configured by us to support DFAR 7012 and FedRAMP-aligned workloads. It's purpose-built for government contractors running business-critical applications such as ERP, financial systems that interact with CUI, providing a compliant foundation without the overhead of on-prem infrastructure. NeoSystems is also CMMC Level 2 certified. We do understand what it takes and where the challenges are, and we've built these services to meet you wherever you are in your journey. So, all right, with that all out of the way, let's open it up to Q&A, shall we?
All right, thank you, Megan. So we do have a few questions that have come in. Again, we have some time now, so if anyone has any questions for our panel, anything they've heard today, please go ahead and enter those into the Q&A area. First question we have is, what is the current lead time C3PAOs are seeing for scheduling assessments? Simply put, how long will it take to get us on your calendar?
Anybody want to? I'll take the lead on that. I think most C3PAOs, certainly if you've been in the ecosystem for a while and have been conducting assessments, are probably at least several months booked out. I can say I've heard a couple are booked out through the rest of the year. But again, the assessors continue to get accredited and credentialed, I guess I should say. So there are more in the marketplace, and that helps us move assessments moving forward. I mean, I think virtually all, Corinne, Scott, I'm curious your perspective, at least probably into the late spring, early summer at this point. But speculation, I don't know everybody's business.
Yeah, well, every once in a while somebody gets a little nervous and they move their date. So sometimes
Yes.
an opening can come up, but whether or not the stars align and whether or not we're able to accommodate, your schedule, I would bet on about at least 3 to 4 months, and then what we're doing right around the 3 to 4 month wait mark, we're hiring another team. So like now we have more openings because we have another team available, but the C3PO is going to wait till they're to a certain threshold probably before bringing on another team. So I'm finding with all my friends that are owning C3PAOs that they're at the least saying about 3 to 4 months, and then like you said, some all the way up until next year.
And just quickly, I would say same for us, 3 to 4 months out. The one thing to think about though is we're getting a lot of requests for assessments in third quarter, and we're just not going to be able to do all those in third quarter because I think everybody's looking at that November 10th date as a deadline. And it's not necessarily a deadline, but it's a good date to go with. So that's happening too. There's a lot of push where people are like starting to, I don't want to say panic, but there's a little bit of that feeling out there that people are getting concerned. So keep that in mind.
All right, great. We have a few more questions and just a few minutes to get through them, so I'll go ahead and work through these. First one is, could you use the same C3PAO for a mock assessment and the actual assessment? If so, would that C3PAO have to make reference to the mock assessment in connection with the actual assessment?
I'll just say quick because I talked about it earlier, but the answer is yes. But there is a statement that they should put on the results from the mock assessment that comes from the DoD that states that it's not a CMMC level 2 assessment. And again, it has to be a situation where consulting is not provided.
A lot of misunderstanding around this topic where folks think they can convert a mock to a real if they do well. But, Matt Travis at the Cyber AB has made it clear that that type of conversion from a mock that has gone well to just suddenly zap it into being a real, regardless of the processes followed, is not allowable under the current procedures and processes. But he did make an announcement at the last town hall that if your C3PAO is conducting a real CMMC level 2 assessment, and that assessment is going south, that the C3PAO and the OSC, if an agreement, could elect to make it a not for record assessment. And so that is not coming from me. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to the Cyber AB town halls, which is on their website under news and events, and you can look at the last one where he talks about this option. And I'm not sure how long that will stay around for, but that is currently his guidance.
Okay, next question is, where is the line in the sand on whether you need a level 2 third-party assessment or a self-assessment? Is it contract driven or driven by CUI storage?
Let Tom take it.
Contract driven. What's in your contract is the rule. Ideally, it lines up with the storage of CUI, but level 2, even at the self-assessment level, is based around NIST 800-171, which is for the protection of CUI. So both levels presumably would address the protection of CUI. It does come down to the solicitation RFP and what the clause will be in the contract.
Yeah, your provisions 252, is it 204, 7025 will tell you what the requirement is going to be, and that will be based on the project manager's determination of the data involved and what requirement they choose to put in, with the exception that in this first year, obviously the DOW did ask that the C3PAO third-party assessment requirement be limited until the date that everyone's talking about, which is what, Tom? What is the November 17th, I guess, would be the date where they're free to put in level 3 C3PAO. They're free now, but they were urged not to, I guess is a good way to put it.
Okay, so this will be our final question as we wrap up. Can you confirm that CMMC Level 2 certification for contracts and options renewal won't be required until November of 2027?
We cannot confirm that. I don't think, can we, Tom?
No.
Because they're allowed to if they want
it's
to.
No,
looking for level 2 certification for contracts and options will be required. No, it's November 26th. It's this year where it's used. So not all contracts, not all renewals will have the CMMC stipulation for assessment in it. So, there's a big race to this year, November 10th, 2026. But, it's still a phase rollout, which we didn't really talk about today. So there are follow-on years, phase 3 in 2027, then 2028. But by 2028, we expect all of the contracts and solicitations to have the CMMC clause in it.
and Tom, maybe one thing to just quickly add also is that it flows down through that contract. So if that contract has it, all the subcontractors where it's appropriate would get that flowed down to them also. So if the big contract, there could be all of a sudden 10,000 subcontractors that need to be level 2 assessed. So
And this is what you're talking about. Justin Johnson asked a question about that, Scott. And remember that the DOW has their hand on the throttle, so they decide if they're going to put the requirement in there or not. And if you're a DoD contractor, you're familiar with the solicitation phase in RFIs where they put their feelers out and try to gain a little bit of information about the bidders who are coming forward. Well, they're going to learn during RFI how many of you are already CMMC level 2 third party. And I can tell you that if a bunch of your competitors are CMMC level 2 third party and the data is the type that is supposed to have a third party assessment, they're going to want to put that requirement in there. They're not going to cut their foot off though. So if there's no one who's capable of doing the work that has a CMMC level 2 third party assessment, they don't have to put that requirement in there in the first 3 years. So they really have control over the rollout of this.
All right, so that will wrap up our presentation for today. I certainly want to thank all of our panelists for their great insights on this topic. Also want to thank everyone who attended today. As we mentioned earlier, this is episode 3 in our 5-part series, so please keep an eye out for an invitation to our next episode, which will be coming out soon. So again, thank you and have a
Thank
great
you.
day.